this video is primarily about gain staging, both in the box and outside the box, because it matters in both situations and they have unique circumstances. But I also, there's some somewhat tangentially related thoughts that I'd like to share as well. Welcome to my ADHD mind. So let's start with the main topic though, which is gain staging. And this is one of those things where, you know, it's incredibly simple and seemingly obvious in theory, but it's also very, very easy to let it get away from you. And I think that's why you see a lot of, you know, people making videos about it and emphasizing how important it is, because what it really boils down to is that it's a very high priority. It's a higher priority than I think a lot of people end up assigning to it. And the longer you're doing this activity of mixing, the more you realize just how important it really is. I know for me, you know, what'll happen is everyone's familiar with the concept of mix creep. So that's not me. That's not the guy mixing. It's when your faders, you know, when you want a little bit more of this and a little bit more of that, and before you know it, everything's been raised, and you know, things just, the channels keep going up and the master keeps going down. And anybody who's done live sound certainly has experienced this. It's very easy to have happen, but it also happens in the studio as well. So the problem with that is, you know, as you're on any individual move you're making, it's getting better. You're adjusting the mix. You're saying, oh, I don't hear enough of this instrument, so you put that instrument up. And so the last thing you'd want to do is have to deal with pulling everything down and rebalancing it. But that's exactly what you end up needing to do after you've individually pushed every instrument up because you can't hear it enough. Really what that's an example of is one of the ways in which gain staging can get lost or forgotten about or deprioritized. And you know, the other way in the box that it can happen is in between plugin inserts, you know, particularly, you know, ones that affect gain, you know, makeup gains on compressors, things like that. It's very, very easy to have happen. Also, you know, you might, common one is you might be sending what seems like a healthy signal into an equalizer, and then you find yourself, you know, boosting the low end or the top end or the mid or whatever, but you're boosting, and you know, all that is pushing the fader up on a particular frequency. You know, you're adjusting the gain. So if you didn't include headroom in order to do that on the input signal, well, welcome to, now you have a much hotter output from that plugin. And then, God forbid, the next plugin in the insert chain is a compressor, and it starts, you know, tamping down the level. And if you're not paying attention, you might never know that you were negatively affecting the signal, that you were maybe overdriving the input of that compressor from the output of the equalizer, so on and so forth. Happens very easily. And where in the box is concerned, I feel like I need to make a special mention for one particular DAW, which is Logic. Pro Tools, Cubase, and I'll be honest with you, I'm less familiar with Ableton. I have it, but I find it so weird that, and alien, its workflow, that I can't really speak to that. But what I can speak to is what happens with Logic, excuse me, need a sip. Is there's so many channel presets, and they impose them so so strongly. Logic demands to know when you create a track, what's it for, and then you tell it, well, it's for a vocal, and then it's like, okay, what kind of vocal, and you tell it, and then it slams, and boom, it puts up 6 plugins that you didn't ask for, and that happens on guitar, it happens on what have you. It's difficult to use Logic without Logic imposing its own plugins, and then beyond that, just the GUI, like the metering, I find to be less than stellar in the mixer mode, in the mixer window, and so it just happens very, very particularly easy in Logic. I see people working in it, overdriving their mix bus, overdriving between plugins, just a lot of red lights, and it's happened more than once where I've had to consult somebody, usually an artist doing their own work at home, and the main thing it needed was everything to be pulled down and just some real attention to gain staging. But anyway, so that's a particular issue, and all I can tell you is, if you're using Logic, my advice is, even if you like a preset that Logic puts on a channel, as soon as it does it, go through and bypass them all, and going down in order one by one, turn them on, check your levels coming in and going out from that particular plugin, then check the next plugin and make sure that everything is copacetic going all the way down. And always be looking at your mix bus, make sure you're not hitting that too hard, so on and so forth. Also, I think part of the GUI on Logic, like the default GUI, like you get kind of like short fader throws, and so when you have a longer throw, you're more apt to settle for lower levels, but at any rate, again, that's a unique problem to Logic. Anybody out there who is using Logic and wants to chat about that, by all means, hit me up in the comments. We can do that. But so moving on, that same issue though can certainly happen in other DAWs, and it's sort of weird because I know I use Nuendo, which is by Steinberg. It's exactly the same as Cubase, except it has some features that are meant for post-production. But so let's say I use Cubase because it's the same thing for music work. And Steinberg is one of the earliest adopters of a floating point mixer, and whereas Pro Tools took a very long time to switch to that processing model in their mixer, and it almost did a disservice, I think, to some people, because the idea with floating point is that you quote unquote can't clip it. That, like, if you're too loud, it'll just shift the resolution and add another 8 bits above, and so you won't clip. And I mean, to whatever extent that's true in the actual mixer channel, that has very little impact on what's going on with the plugins, and it also and even less impact on what's going on within the plugin modeling. And that's another issue that's really important to take into consideration within the box gain staging, is where is your gain coming from? And this is something I think a lot of people don't really consider enough, which is, if your gain, for instance, is coming from the makeup gain on an analog modeled compressor, that's not pure transparent gain. You know, that compressor was modeled to emulate, you know, anything from output transistors or output transformers to tubes to op amps, you name it. And it's, you know, they wrote that program to change the sound as you're boosting more. So it's incredibly important to be aware of, like, where is your gain coming from. So for instance, I mean, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know, my hybrid approach is I'm sending individual output buses from the DAW through the analog mixer, and then the output of the mixer, I'm feeding an input channel on my DAW, and that's being recorded in real time, you know, to an open track. So what happens is, one of the reasons that I do that is I want the opportunity to be able to include something like this, which is a peak limiter. I mean, there isn't, you know, that's a digital tool that you can only really do in the digital domain. And so for me, like, I want that to be the last thing the sound hits before it's actually getting recorded. So that has to be on my input channel, not on the channel that's actually doing the recording, right? So, and what I'll also do frequently, like right now it's off, but you know, you have this input channel here, you can put anything you want on it. So sometimes, you know, I'll throw an SSL modeled bus compressor on there, right? Now that has makeup gain. All right, so now let's say I don't think I have enough input gain here on my peak limiter. So I can crank the makeup gain on the SSL, and who knows, you know, for a given piece of music, I might want that. But it's super important to acknowledge that you're getting a modeled output on this from this plugin. So let's say I don't want to do that, but I still want more gain, more input gain here. There's the fader of the input channel here, and I can push that and get the same effect with no modeling, and, you know, get that extra gain, but totally transparent and clean. You still have to worry about whatever modeling is going on in here. You might be increasing the gain reduction of your peak limiter by doing that, but, you know, being aware of these differences is really, really important, and that can apply to you know, within a chain of plugins on a regular channel as well. You know, like you may not want to you know, push the gain on. Well, I've made my point, but like one plugin that I find is sort of gain weird, I would put it, is the UAD Fairchild plugin. I love that plugin. I think it sounds fantastic. I reach for it all the time. But I've found that, like, in its default state, that a normal signal, you know, that's healthy is incredibly low in the default state. Now that plugin has a headroom, you know, a headroom knob. Like it's an emulated little you know, thing like that, you know, screwdriver knob. But you can crank that. But anytime I use that plugin, I do a 3-stage, you know, I do the gain staging. I switch it to input monitoring. I use the headroom, and I get that input up to, you know, something healthy, close to zero VU, 0 dBu. Then go look at, you know, the gain reduction, set that to something that's not too extreme, because normally when you do crank that input, you're gonna get a lot more gain reduction. you know, set that to usually 2 to 3 dB, depending on what it is. And then go look at the output, which usually has to be scaled back as well. And, you know, once you set all those things correctly, it's a beautiful plugin. It does a great job. But if you don't, you're really not getting the benefit of it. And it sounds obvious, but it's really, I know there's a lot of people out there, you know, not using that plugin in particular probably correctly. So that's in the box. Now for outside the box, you know, the same thing can happen in terms of like the mix creep. Well, that can happen with processing gear. You know, there's so many levels that you need to be, you know, vigilant about and very aware of. You know, first of all, obviously, if you're doing analog mixing, you have to be incredibly aware of your D to A levels. So just the individual channels coming out of your DAW and coming out of your interface, you know, and you know, the bottom row is my outputs, and you want them healthy, but you got to be careful. You don't want red lights, you know. Now the 31 and 32, that's my monitoring of the whole mix after the peak limiting, so that's why that's so hot. But that's, yeah, that's a signal that's being very carefully sculpted to hit that high. But so, you know, and not only that, you need a healthy level, but you also have to have, you got to leave a little headroom if you want to do any processing. I mean, you know, in my case, yeah, I've got these analog equalizers, and you know, I might do some, you know, sculpting out of frequencies, but for the most part, I tend to do that in the box using fab filter or some kind of, you know, really surgical equalizer, because that's what, you know, that's what that's better for. You know, it's just a better application. You know, something like fab filter for pulling out bad frequencies works better. So these tend to be additive equalizers. I tend to be boosting with the analog EQs more than cutting. Not always, but you know, more often than not. So you have to build in, you know, headroom for that. And you know, in this case, you know, with this particular mixer, it's nice because you can, on these 8 channels at least, you can switch the metering between pre and post fader and pre and post EQ. So, you know, it's an acoustic guitar track, and you know, my faders are low, so it's nice to just see that I'm getting a nice healthy level in there in the first place. But again, same thing, be very aware of what level you're coming into analog equalizers with, and very aware of what level you're coming out. This is one of the reasons why, you know, when I found out that there was a 500 series rack that actually had VUs, man, it was game over. Like, you know, they won. Like, you know, I can't imagine ever not having them again because it's so convenient. You know, I mean, like, so like I've got, you know, my hi-hat coming in, you know, to a stereo channel of 7 and 8. It's usually hi-hat and ride. There doesn't happen to be a separate ride track on this, but so that's, I have the inserts on this normal to these equalizers, right? So, you know, I can actually get feedback on that, and it's pretty low. You know, let's take another look. And with the SSL, with the X desk, you actually have input gains. Right? And so now I'm seeing like it's, you know, it's not hitting very hard. So we can go over here and check out, I mean, Steinberg actually has these dedicated output buses, which is really convenient. And this is the channel we're looking at here. And it's not about the fader, it's about the meter, right? So I can push that a little bit. And you know, it's great that the SSL has these signal present LEDs, and you know, it's, if you see a red, you're definitely in trouble. Now the yellows, you know, they're not really telling you all that much. So like if I solo these, it's pretty low, right? Well, the faders are low. It's giving me a post fader level, but I'm able to see here my post EQ levels, and I can do that for any of these. I can dial this to any of them. I can't understand how people get along without it, you know. I mean, and even more to the point, like over here, you know, I've got an electric guitar that's hitting too hard. But it's the same, like, you know, these compressors, I have these two on a stereo acoustic bus, these two on the stereo electric guitar bus. And to be able to look over here and see, okay, that's my acoustic guitar post compressor. I mean, it's one thing to have, you know, these little LEDs, you know, it's nice to know that they're not red, but, you know, I really want to be able to see what's going on. So I don't know, for me, I can't, I own 3 of these, and that's why I can't imagine getting along without them. Once you have them, it's very addictive. And I'm surprised that other companies haven't jumped on that bandwagon, because you know, it's so incredibly useful. You know, I mean, personally, I really like having the VU meters, but like, to my mind, there's room here. You could just put 8 LEDs, and you know, and it'd be great to be able to see all that stuff. So at any rate, and then, you know, you just follow your signal. Again, it feels weird even making a video about this, because it should be so obvious, but it happened to me, like, you know, not that long ago. I was like mixing, and I really felt like, you know, some of the gear had creeped up a bit, and, you know, I just zeroed everything and just ran tones, you know, and just run, you know, a 1K tone at, you know, whatever you want to calibrate your system to. But, you know, common levels are -18 dBFS to reach a 0 dBu in the analog world. And, you know, just make sure that, you know, just get your zeros basically throughout the chain. And I'll tell you, it helps tremendously. It's one of those, you know, dumb things, but just to check yourself, never stop checking yourself, because it doesn't take much. You know, it's having like one instrument. I mean, we just saw like that one guitar channel was overcooking, and you know, you make some changes in the DAW, you don't realize it's affecting everything downstream. I mean, you know, it's like, look, you do realize it, but it's hard to keep track of everything, but it's so important. You know, the definitive statement that I would make as to, you know, not why it's so important, but just how important it is that in my mind, if you get all of your gain staging correct, and you have the signal healthy, you know, kind of right where it's supposed to be, and that includes not just the channels, not just the EQs, but particularly compressors, and you're not overdoing it, you're not overcooking it. I mean, I can't believe how many times I see videos of people with their distressors just filling the meters. I mean, Empirical Labs puts videos of that all the time. I can't think of a situation where that would really work for me. I mean, maybe with like a scream vocal, but it's really, you know, if you get everything set healthy and reasonable, what you're really talking about is mechanical equipment operating within its spec, operating within its intended design spec. Once you achieve that, once you get that so that everything's doing what it's supposed to do, where it's supposed to do it, in my mind, that's at least 60% of the way there, if not more. I mean, you know, if you get all that right, then you can breathe and just make artistic decisions. And, you know, it just makes, you know, once you get all your gear working correctly at every stage, it's tremendous. You know, it makes it so much easier to do your work. I just think 9 times out of 10, when I see people struggling with stuff, gainstaging usually is behind the problem somewhere, you know, because, yeah, and I mean, and also, I think part of that is also, you see people making, you know, what I would call rookie mistakes, but I see people that aren't rookies making this mistake too, which is like equalizing an instrument in solo mode, things like that. And you hear, you know, great mix engineers like Bob Clearmountain and, you know, Chris Lord-Alge telling you not to do it, but you got to really take that seriously. Like, that's not for nothing. It's, you know, what difference does it make what an instrument sounds like by itself? You're not doing it by itself. The only thing that matters is how it blends with the mix, right? So, you know, and that speaks to the gain staging as well. You know, I mean, it's, you know, like right now, like you see how low these faders are. And, you know, that's because I have, like, I'm summing 32 channels, and I'm going through, you know, a mix insert into, and we've done this in other videos too, but, you know, it's so easy for this level to just, you know, start peaking. And the hard part is that with a quality piece of gear like this, it's very easy to sort of fool yourself into thinking, oh, you know, it actually sounds pretty good even when it's slamming, until you, you know, back it off and do it correctly, and then listen to and then gain match them and listen to the difference. And, you know, man, let me tell you something. Headroom and clarity will win every time. If you want something distorted, then use a distortion. Like, you know, do something very intentional with that sound. But, you know, trying to get that effect by misusing gain staging is something I don't recommend at all. You know, it's really, you know what I would compare it to, and this is actually a very, this is an important analogy, because I think it really, it can enlighten, you know, the whole issue. I look at, people will tend to misuse gain staging to sort of, to lean into, you know, the Fletcher Munson curve and try to get, like, you know, the low end bigger. And it's very much the same as leaning into a microphone, you know, to get, you know, warmth and low end on your voice. But there's a price to pay for doing it that way. You know, you usually lose something in intelligibility. You know, you usually get a woofiness along with that. Not always, it depends, but and the same thing applies to mixing, but there's usually somewhat of a price to pay for that. And, you know, if you're riding that tiger and you're trying to figure out whether you want to pay that price or not, one of the most important things to keep in mind, just like I was discussing about, you know, the emulated transformers on a plugin, well, what about the real transformers? So for instance, like on this mixer, there are transformers on the inserts and transformers on the main output, right? So I'm working to sort of keep this mix fader up to hit those output transformers, but I don't know if I can properly illustrate how much difference there is. Yeah, you pull that level down, you push it up, and, you know, our animal instincts make us always choose the louder thing, right? And also, you know, not for nothing, but when you make it louder, you can hear more detail, and that's always appealing. But what actually happened when I did that is the compression increased pretty dramatically, right? And you know, if you get your ears tuned to that, and you can just hear the dynamic range getting squashed up against the top. Now, this is all super high quality equipment, so like what you're not hearing, and particularly with this music, is, you know, transients getting smeared, and like you're not hearing some of the more extreme artifacts that can happen from doing that, but you're still, you know, you're still getting a very particular type of compression, very particular. And in the same way that proximity effect is a very particular kind of low end on a vocal. And the older I get and the longer I do this, the less I want that kind of thing, you know, like unless it's really specific, you know, like the need, you know, like this, I would rather get it in more intentional kind of ways, you know. Like I'd rather have a compressor on the mix bus that I'm dialing to exactly where I want it, you know. Like what another perspective on this is you hear people talk about the sweet spot on an analog mixing board. Again, this is something you hear more about in live mixing consoles, although not anymore since all live mixing consoles are digital now, but you used to hear about it a lot in live mixing consoles. But in analog console, they talk about having a sweet spot. Well, okay, a sweet spot sounds like something perfect in the middle of something, but it's not really. Like, you know, what a sweet spot really is the edge of the cliff. You know, it's pushing it just to the point before where it's too much, right? So that's a really important distinction to make, you know, that like, oh, you're right at the edge of it being too much. And what you'll hear engineers say all the time is, you know, push it till it's too much and back it off a little. And okay, fine, good. But, you know, I think it's really important to always keep perspective on, you know, like, well, what else did you do in that process? Like, what else did you lose? What did you give up? You know, like, you may have a compression that you kind of like, but you know, is it as specific a compression as you could get from, you know, going through you know, a bunch of different kinds of actual compressors and using, you know, all kinds of tools, using, you know, a high pass filter on the detector. There isn't one on that, you know, that's just hitting the whole mix, right? So, you know, you know, you may get a little rush because it sounds good when you push it, but I would encourage everyone to think about, like, what is it about this that I like, and is there a better way to achieve that? You know, and maybe there's not. Maybe that is the thing you want to do. But, you know, to me, what's lacking so much in what I'm hearing in music production these days is dynamic range, and depth of field. And, you know, the more you slam a transformer, it may get louder and you may even get punchier, but you usually are probably losing those other two qualities. And so, you know, my question is there a way to get what you wanted out of the compression and the punch without losing so much, you know, of the depth of field, you know? And I mean, you're going to lose the dynamic range, but there might be a way to do that in a more complex way, you know. And maybe you don't really want to lose the dynamic range on everything. Maybe you only want the drums to be a little more compressed or something, or the bass, or just the low end, or, you know, things like that. It's just worth considering all these things and really, you know, I don't know. I just like, I'm hearing professional mixes that I feel like, you know, I'm hearing they're not considering these things, and they're not terribly clear, and I saw a video the other day by, I guess it was a studio that offers mastering, and they were comparing their in-the-box master to a famous mastering engineer's product that apparently was done with analog equipment. And, theirs was louder and had a little more sub and a little more top than the mastering engineer's product, right? Now, and they were using that as a point, like to use us because we're louder and bigger than his work. And, first of all, it was a bit of a bait and switch, because if you really want to compare them, you have to gain match them. Louder is not a comparison that should mean anything to you, particularly now when radio stations have always slammed music, into a brick wall limiter. But what the hell is radio, right? So fine. So Spotify and Apple, they all have gain matching now, right? So I just people are getting better about measuring LUFS and not getting so into slamming the level, but for a mastering service provider to try to sell their services based on a level difference to me is a bit of a bait and switch. Match the levels and then show me. And what I heard, for having used a few of these old school mastering guys, greats really, in the past, is that they were trained, and for the last 30 years or wherever they've been working, they've been mastering to sound good on the radio. They've been mastering to sound good when it goes through the typical brick wall limiters that radio stations have. And it's a whole other discussion about whether they should be doing that now in the streaming age, and whether they shouldn't adjust what they're doing a little for that. And I think there's a point to be made there. But I recognized that sound in the quieter, established mastering engineers' work that was not in the newer one. And it's, I don't know, I guess I'm not entirely clear on how to phrase the point that I'm trying to make, except for that you really have to think about where the music's going, but also why are you going for the sound that you're going for? Is super bright and ridiculously subbed really is that really a good sound? I just bought a song because I liked it, that I heard on a television show, and listened to the download from Apple Music in my car, which I know my car very, very well. It's not some outrageously great stereo, but I know it. I really know what music sounds like on it. And it was not a good or clear mix by my estimation. The vocals were pretty clear, but even that could have been done better. And what it sounded to me like was a very poor mix down, or from a surround mix that was probably done for the television version, but it wasn't handled very well. They clearly tried to keep a surround feel in the stereo field, and what they ended up with was, in my opinion, garbage. It didn't translate well, and they honestly should have just done a whole separate stereo mix. It wasn't punchy, it wasn't clear, it wasn't it wasn't big, it wasn't everything it should be in a stereo mix. So how that relates to gainstaging and everything, it's just, again, I think it all relates to keeping perspective on what you want, what sound you're actually going for, and then where are you going to achieve it. And my advice, my experience, take it for what it's worth. You know, maybe nothing to you, but you know, I don't think gainstaging is the place to go for too much of that. You know, I mean, look, everything's a matter of degree. I think this sounds better than this. Like you can turn up the monitor, turn down the fader. Still pretty good. Notice the kick drum comes out a lot more because there's less compression, and I was mixing into the compression I was getting here. So turn that up, turn this down. All right, and you might even say that that's the API sound. You know, I'm running through 2520 op amps and API transformers, and you know, so I do want some of that, but I'm just encouraging people to, at the very least, make it a conscious decision. Know what you're working with, know where you're getting it from, and you know, make your judgment call in an informed way. You know, and that, to do that requires being really, really, really careful about your gain staging at every place. So, all right, I think that's about it. Take care, everybody. Please like and subscribe. The channel's doing really well, and we'd love to see that keep happening. Please join me in the comments, share your thoughts. It's been a lot of fun getting to meet all of you. And oh, I had one last thought. I always have one last thought, right? Somebody commented on one of the other videos that, like, oh dude, like, you have such nice gear that your speakers aren't good enough for your gear and you got to get ATCs. So obviously I don't agree with that person. I think the PMCs are amazing, but I should say I do know what he's talking about. Let me turn this down. And I agree with the concept of what this person was saying, which is that to make these informed decisions, you do have to have really good monitoring, and you have to have monitoring that you trust. And that, you know, that is everything you do. And this is, you know, all stuff you hear on lots of other people's videos too. But, you know, a monitoring system is the combination of your speakers and the room, and where they sit and whatever else is in the room. And, you know, I'm at a place right now where the room that I have and these speakers are working really, really well, like really well. Like I'm getting some of the best translation I've ever had in my life in any room right now with these speakers and a sub. And you know, with the sub, I was pretty careful about, you know, the tuning the levels of the sub and the crossover. But you know, that's critical for being able to hear things like what we were just going over, you know, about like how much of an effect the compression of these transformers is having. And it can be really, really subtle, you know, like, I mean, with good monitors, the difference between this and that and that, I mean, you know, you're hearing volume changes, but, you know, with good monitors, I can really key in on the compression changes. And it does. He's not wrong that, you know, to be able to make the kind of decisions you need to make, particularly, and he's also not wrong with the higher quality your gear gets, the more subtle your decisions are going to be. So in a way, the better your monitoring, you know, does need to be. So he's not wrong about that. He's just wrong about PMC not qualifying for that. And ATCs are fantastic. You know, it's a personal thing everybody goes through. I know for me, you know, I've never had a perfect room. The acoustics in my current room are actually better than I've had weirdly, because it's a small space and I had a lot of bass trap material, so I'm able to get it pretty dead in here. But the thing that helped me the most was this space has a cement floor, and the lack of resonance off the floor is amazing, and I'm loving that, and that's really doing wonders for the accuracy of what I'm hearing out of these. But yeah, it's he's not wrong that accurate monitoring is a huge deal, and so, you know, it's a journey for everybody. But what I was going to say is, if you don't have a perfect room, and who the hell does, go smaller. You know, yeah, I went to these PMC 226s from Quested 2108s, and the Questeds are phenomenal speakers. They're great, but they were interacting with the room a lot, and it was really, you know, if you have a fantastic room, that's less of a problem. But the PMCs all at once have a truer, wider dispersion. I mean, I really get the same mix sitting, you know, 3 feet that way or back, but at the same time they're more focused, and there's less interaction with the room with them. So they really work for me in that regard. And you know, to me, like, smaller bookshelf size monitors, if they're really high quality, is a great combination. So it makes me wonder, I mean, ATC does make small speakers, but it makes me wonder if, you know, even, you know, whatever they are, the SCM 25s might even be more than I need. Yeah, who knows, maybe someday I'll try them. But right now I'm loving what I'm getting out of these PMCs, and I highly recommend them. And from what I understand, there's the newer version of these, just the PMC 6s. They've improved on this model even a bit with those. So yeah, I highly recommend them. But anyway, so good point, bro. But yeah, I'm happy. All right, take care, everyone. So long.